Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thank you for joining us for our second and final session of New Threats, New Defense, the Future of National Security. We kicked things off this morning with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and there was a lot there. For the next hour or so, we are going to be taking a close look at how America's social contract with the rest of the world has shifted and what that means for our needs and our evolving national security infrastructure. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at #TheHillNatSec. That's The Hill, N-A-T-S-E-C. We are broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions throughout the program. And I already have a big chunk of them here from you, so thank you so much. As with any live stream, you could experience occasional trouble with the video. Refreshing the page should in most cases fix the problem. If not, you can watch the recording later. Dr. Peter Highnam is Acting Director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. I think I got that wrong. DARPA. It's my favorite place in government, better known as, I don't know, I wanted to basically tell Peter that's where I sort of look at him as where, I'll call Peter the Q for today's conversations, like from James Bond. The agency we can thank for the internet and GPS, among others. How is DARPA gearing up for the future of American national security? How does it make its strategic bets? Let's hear a little bit about DARPA's Magic. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. And let me just start out and ask you, for those lay people watching today's forum on national security and the choices as we look forward, what is your North Star when you look at how you look at threats and how you assemble teams and technology to tackle them?
That's the story of DARPA. And if you don't mind, I'd like to begin my answer by giving a quote actually from The Hill magazine. So back on 21st of May, 2020, Jim Langevin and Elise Stefanik, the chair and the ranking member of the subcommittee of the HASC subcommittee on intelligence and emerging threats and capabilities, wrote a piece for The Hill, and basically the title is "The Certainty of the Unknown." And I'm just going to read one paragraph as a quote from that. And this begins to answer the question you asked me. In 1958, in the shadows of the Sputnik launch and the chill of the Cold War, our nation created DARPA. DARPA's purpose was clear: to create and to prevent strategic technological surprise. Over the decades, DARPA research has contributed to revolutionary new military and commercial technologies and products, including the Internet, night vision, stealth, and even the first iPhone. While the nature of the threat has changed over the last 60 years, DARPA's guiding principle has not. Big rewards require taking big risks. And this really is the essence of DARPA. Past investments that have made were people at DARPA who looked ahead, who looked at the current and emerging threats, looked at the technological status at the time, and decided where to invest and where to push. And this is the DARPA story. It's always the case that past investments are anticipating current needs. And so I'd like to give some specific examples around COVID-19. Over the last 15 years, DARPA investments, biological research investments, have led to the nucleic acid vaccines that are now in the news. A lot of the work on the antibodies, both detection, characterization, and the potential for treatment and other purposes. CRISPR-based approaches for diagnosis. Epigenetics or host-based responses for very sensitive, very specific tests. And perhaps, as a lot of discussion takes place these days, on routes to bring manufacturing back onshore for medical countermeasures in critical times. So again, these investments weren't made today. They weren't made 2 years ago or 3 years ago. These are made over the last 10 or 15 years when DARPA personnel or people coming to DARPA to do tours looked at the threat landscape, looked at what was going on, and made investments. And now we get to be the beneficiaries of those investments. So this is true today. We always, now bringing back to your question, we have there are internal processes. There are general lines at any given time about where we're making investments, what types of things we're focused on. But within that, it's very much bottom up. The program managers at DARPA help to, they're from the communities where these technologies exist. They are experts. They bring it in to us with ideas for new research programs, anticipating future problems, future threats, and then they execute those programs. So DARPA is designed not to have a single North Star, or maybe the sense is a North Pole. So in the sense of magnetism, we're always pushing, we're always driving towards what needs to be done. And by turning over DARPA personnel continuously, we don't get, the place doesn't get stuck doing something it was doing just because it does it. So it's designed to be on that leading edge and to define that leading edge of technologies. And lastly, since I may not get an opportunity later, we thank the Hill, both yes, the magazine, but also the personnel and the committees for their support, particularly the HASC, has been really, really great, as well as working with senior DoD leaders throughout DARPA's 62-year history and the administration. It's been a pleasure to have the autonomy to execute as we have.
Well, we're going to have Chairman Adam Smith on shortly, so I will be sure to raise some of the questions about DARPA's contributions on national security. But Dr. Highnam, thank you for that description. You work in so many areas that the public can't know about right now, that we're not cleared for. But beyond COVID-19, can you share with us some of the other programs that you are working on, that you are applying the talents and technology across the national security spectrum?
Gladly. So as some of the folk listening may not be aware, DARPA doesn't actually do any research in-house. So we have people who come, everybody on the technical management side, myself included. We come to DARPA, we do limited tours, 3 to 4 years typically, and then we leave. So at this moment, then we have experts on board on a few areas that I'll talk about now. So one, let's talk about AI. Back in September of 2018, we made an announcement to say that we were going to be putting $2 billion into AI research over a 5-year period, so $400 million a year. Again, all executed by large and small businesses, by the national labs, by universities, by people outside of DARPA. Now, what's missing from that picture is that DARPA's been involved in AI as a research field, artificial intelligence as a research field, since its very beginning, since back to 1960, the first mobile robots sponsored by DARPA, 1960, the first chess-playing program back then as well. And we've been, as the field has ebbed and waned over the years, we've been there and we've maintained investments. Today, we have investments to both advance state-of-the-art in AI as a science, applications of AI, AI hardware, autonomy or autonomous behavior, and in all kinds of spaces, from planes to manufacturing. I mentioned medical manufacturing earlier. That's absolutely AI-based with robotics. Going after fraud detection in social media with major programs, how to explain what an AI system is doing, how to put common sense into systems. And then, in terms of bridging to the next topic, we ran something called a Spectrum Collaboration Challenge last year, where we allowed a number of players to participate in how to make most efficient use of a certain chunk of spectrum to achieve some normal business in a town or a city, plus some medical emergency types of things, all in the same space. And the winners were rewarded for their ability to sense what was going on and to collaborate with any other radios and such that were out there to make things happen. So and the winners were AI approaches. So this type of work then bridges from the electronics, it bridges from the supercomputing to do the modeling and simulation, ties in AI, and then takes us across to 5G, because that's where this type of thinking, this type of technology has to be in place for that world to work and to work well. You don't know who else the other players are in a given space. You know there's a certain amount of spectrum and so on. How do you make that work? So AI bridging across through 5G. In 5G, we have a number of activities, including and so continuing a line of work, producing new, more efficient hardware for the frequencies of interest, much more powerful, much smaller, and so on. And we've also taken steps to break apart the vendor lock that comes with going all the way from the software stack all the way down to the basic hardware, with some major programs to open source much of that software stack, and working closely with universities and other teams from across the country. So that's AI, 5G, and so on. In electronics, more generally, we started something called the Electronics Resurgence Initiative back in 2017. Dollar-wise, about 1.5 billion investment over 5 years. And it's intended to, it's all focused on ensuring that the Defense Department has continued access to the world-class chips. And that means design, it means security, it means working environments where there's maybe zero trust, and it includes manufacturing processes too. Part of this, we've all heard about Moore's Law. Well, Moore's Law's paper, when it came out, had 3 pages to it. And Moore's Law is the first 2 pages. We focused on the 3rd page, which is specialized devices rather than just decreasing feature size. So very interesting place to play. And while we all talk about silicon and semiconductors, when you look at a modern chip, there's essentially half the periodic table in these things. Right. These are very complex places to play.
Right. Well, Peter, if I may, you and I had a discussion just recently where I had shared that since the 1990s, really, I had been such a fan and so interested in the contributions that DARPA had made, not just to national security, but many of these have spilled over to the rest of society and have really changed the world in very dramatic ways. And there was no doubt in our past that DARPA had contributed incredible moments of strategic leaps for our society and for our technological capabilities. Is our strategic lead in this area secured by DARPA still very secure, or have other nations mimicked what you're doing? Have they caught up? Has there been a great diminishment in our technological lead on things like AI, 5G? We've heard the president's comments, for instance, on Huawei just last evening. So how far ahead or not are we today?
I think this is, when I ask these questions, I describe this as a Red Queen game from Alice in Wonderland. It's always about, you never get to stand still. You always have to keep moving, and you always have to move faster. So many of these technologies, 20 or 30 years ago, we had the clear lead, and not alone, but clear lead. Now we have others who are investing as much as well, and we have to be there, and we have to push harder and faster, and we have to really play the long game on some of these things. So when I talk about DARPA, I think when it was started back in '58, the long game aspect was designing a machine, the DARPA machine, to continuously force the pace on these technologies. So again, by bringing people in all the time, by not getting hooked on any specific technology or way of doing business, the DARPA approach always forces the pace. So yes, others are investing significantly. There are major commercial interests worldwide, but on the research front, on the understanding for whatever the thing is of the moment, how well can it be done, or can it be done? How well can it be done? What's the implication for national security? DARPA is designed to be there and to push. So not the quantitative answer you might want there, I'm afraid, but the DARPA machine has in no way run out of gas. Again, by design, back in '58, when they put this thing together, it's a recipe that still works really well.
You have a program that I'm intrigued with. It does fall into the COVID territory, I think, but it covers a lot of other areas that I think is called DARPA Sigma Plus, which is essentially a citywide, city-scale surveillance system, not just for biological threats, but threats across a number of other spectrums. Can you share with us any more about that?
Right. There was a Sigma program which finished, I think, last year. And that one looked for radiological threats. And that means in an environment, in a city scale. So the question for that program was, how do you minimize the false alarms while still being very sensitive to what's going on? Is there a small source of radiation somewhere, ionizing radiation, that can be picked up? And the magic sauce is to have a lot of inexpensive sensors that people wear, and the program Sigma did that again for radiological sources. But the magic sauce was combining that information with a sense of where the measurements were made, what was reported, and some environmental conditions to produce a very sensitive, very low false alarm system at city scale. Sigma Plus is taking that same approach, but now adding in certain chemical threats and also some biological threats, the same type of thinking.
Well, Dr. Highnam, we have the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee lined up next. I don't want to keep him waiting, but I do want to thank you because giving us even these insights into what you're doing. We had a question that I'd hoped to pose from John Fee at EY that basically said, how do we diminish the gap of really the public not knowing much about these programs and what's going on? And you've just contributed a lot, I think, to that answer. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us how you're thinking about doing this. And I want to ask you, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, come back and let's see what you put on the table when we can look back and talk about the stuff that we don't even know about yet.
So thank you very much for your time and your interest. I have no doubt in my mind that this machine, again, which they got right back in '58, is still going to be delivering at the same pace for the country.
Well, Dr. Peter Highnam, Acting Director of DARPA, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.